So we're talking about engagement terms and conditions, getting the legal bits right and minimizing the risks of getting it wrong. So the kind of working through a hierarchy, I'm going to be working through from independent contractors through to employees. So the first one, first engagement, usually particularly for small businesses, is whether or not you engage people as an independent contractor. And there's always a big question about, are they genuinely an independent contractor? Well, if they look like a duck, quack like a duck, and waddle like a duck, maybe they are an employee. So if you are unsure, double check. It's easy to change whilst everybody is talking. If you have got them on the wrong agreement and you need to change it, easy to do while everybody's talking. But once you get into a dispute, it's a blooming nightmare. And the IRD can chase you if you get it wrong. Now, before you go panicking, don't worry, I'm going to be coming on to exactly what the IRD looks at and things like that. And what you need to also be considering is the difference in cost between an employee and a contractor is 21.5%. And that is made up of holiday pay at 8%, sick leave up 4%, stat days 4.5%, ACC 2% or more if you're in high risk industries, KiwiSaver 3%. It's a total of 21.5%. So the other thing to think about is that's what your employees are actually costing you. They're not costing you minimum wage. They're costing you minimum wage plus 21.5%. So yeah, important to be aware of that particular number. So the courts, when they look at this, so if an independent contractor, there's two times that this comes under challenge. Is one where there's a dispute and they try to raise a personal grievance against you. And the first argument that they have to make is, I genuinely believed I was an employee, not a contractor, in order for them to be allowed to raise a personal grievance. The other time it comes into dispute is when they get the tax bill at the end of the year and they say, oh, oops, sorry, IRD, I thought Mr. Employer was paying my bill. Now, what the courts look at are the four legal tests. So this intention test. Now, this is what was the intention of both parties. The control versus independence test. So this is about how much can you substitute yourself? How much do you have to, as that individual? So if you're engaging Lisa Mackay to come and do your admin, wouldn't recommend it. I'm pretty useless at admin. But if you're engaging me to come and do your admin and you're saying, right, Lisa, you're an independent contractor, you can do the work whenever you like. You're quite independent. You're contracted out to do it. Clearly, I have the independence. But if you're saying that you have to come into my office Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 to do the admin, then you're dictating the control. Are you putting them through disciplinary or are you treating them like a contractor? So I'm clearly, as HR Toolkit, I'm clearly a contractor. And if you don't want like my services anymore, you say, bye, don't need you anymore. Thanks very much. The integration test, how much are they part of the business? And the fundamental economic reality test. So why would somebody be claiming home office expenses, doing GST returns, et cetera, if they genuinely believed they were an employee? Now, the good news is that the courts don't like people trying to have a punt both ways. And so they don't like people trying to claim to be employee when it suits them and contractor when it suits them. So the good news about these tests, hey, if you read the test, I could justify that I was an employee of yours just by you listening to this webinar. They're so broad. But the reality is the way the courts actually apply them is what they're looking at is what was the genuine understanding of both parties. So in order to minimize your risk, ensure you have an agreement in writing. There is a template independent contractor agreement on the website. If in doubt, double check that they understand. And as I said before, issues arise when they get the tax bill or when there's a dispute. So that's independent contractors. If you've got any questions, do pop them into the chat and I can jump back to them, or I can come back to them later. So, employment agreements. Now, there's a number of different types of employment agreements. So you need to make sure that you've got the right kind of contract in place. You've got casual, you've got lower guaranteed hours, you've got fixed term, you've got part-time, and you've got full-time. So whichever contract you've got, you have various legal bits that have to be included. So it must be negotiated in good faith. So it should be given in advance of them starting employment. And I know that this is a horror for some businesses that they, it's like give them the contract on the day they turn up. And it's like, yeah, really probably not actually the best practice. In fact, it's definitely not best practice. You should try and give it to them in advance of them starting. It must be signed before they start. Now, this is an important part around the trial periods in particular, not probation periods, but trial periods. Because what the trial period legislation says is that you can't use a trial period if somebody has worked for you previously. Now, the very first case that came to court in respect of trial periods was the Stokes Valley Pharmacy case. And in that situation, the employee had been working for Stokes Valley Pharmacy for a couple of years. Stokes Valley Pharmacy was taken over by a new company. So on Friday, she came to work at Stokes Valley Pharmacy, working for ABC. And on Monday, she came to work at Stokes Valley Pharmacy, but now she was working for XYZ. Now, XYZ gave her an employment contract on the Wednesday after they took over, and it included a 90-day trial period. And she questioned it, and there was quite an extensive communication chain about her questioning that. And so the court, and so ultimately, they, at the end of 90 days, they said, oops, bye, don't need you. And so the courts then looked at it and said, no, she had been employed by XYZ for those 3 days. Therefore, she was already a previous employee and you couldn't use the 90-day trial period. And as you can see from that, what I've just explained there was very definitely some dodginess going on there by the company. So they probably were shoehorning it in a little bit to use that excuse, but it was the company who wasn't playing fair in that case. But to avoid that argument, make sure you get it signed before they start working for you. It must include a job description of sufficient detail to understand that to measure performance by. So just having I saw a job description the other day that literally was to do all instructions as directed by the boss. No, it was not a job description. It actually has to tell you what it is you're expected to do. And they must have time and opportunity to seek advice before signing. So again, this is about making sure it's signed before they start, sending it to them before they start, and giving them the time to seek advice on it. And there are a whole list of clauses that must be included. So things like redundancy, probation period, trial period, hours of work, place of work, these all have to be included. And there's other clauses that are recommended, but not obligatory. And one of the things in general I am advising clients at the moment is utilize the HR toolkit templates on the website. There is a lot of legislation changes that have happened over the last few years, and I'm anticipating more. Though I'm keeping on top of those agreements. But what I would recommend is that you download the main template, and in order to future-proof it for yourself, rather than making major edits within the body of the main document, I would suggest that you have if you've got to have additional clauses, then you do them in an appendix to the agreement rather than within the body of the agreement. It just makes it much easier to administer. One of the other things that often comes up is around sick, bereavement leave and stat holidays entitlements. Now, the entitlement under the Act is that if they have a regular working pattern, they are entitled to sick and bereavement leave after 6 months. So even if somebody is on a casual agreement, but they're working regularly every Monday, then they have a regular pattern. So they are actually entitled to 10 days sick leave. And sick leave is not prorated, and nor is bereavement leave. Or if they're not working a regular pattern, so they're working an irregular pattern, then we look at the hours test, which says that if they've worked for an average of 10 hours a week, a minimum of 1 hour a week, or no less than 40 hours each month, after 6 months, they are entitled to sick leave and bereavement leave. Again, not prorated. I did have an employee who, or a group of employees who were cleaners in a motel. They were quite happy with this arrangement, and they were working every Monday, but they were also entitled to the stat days. So a stat day is if it would otherwise be a working day, then they're entitled to it, even if it's second week of employment. So these cleaners who were working 1 day a week every Monday, they were entitled to all the stat days, 10 days sick leave, 4 weeks annual leave, 10 days domestic violence leave. It worked out that they had about 22 weeks of paid leave per year. It was quite ridiculous. So anyway, watch out for that one. And it is the entitlement for everyone, including casuals, if they are either working a regular pattern or they are meeting that hours test. So casual employees, who are these people? It's not actually defined in legislation what is a casual employee. These are the people that work only when and is as and when required. There's no guaranteed hours or income, and there's no expectation of ongoing employment. So these are usually people who are hired for one-off events. So I remember as a university student, I did casual banqueting work. And so whenever there was a banquet on, I would come in and be doing waitressing. And that was a genuine casual employee. You didn't know when the next banquet was going to be booked. You didn't know if you were going to be on the roster or not. There was no expectation. Hey, yeah, if you were good at your job and you turned up on time, then usually you got at the top of the list, but there was still no guarantee that you would be there. And so events businesses, they're frequently casual staff because, you'll come in, you'll do one big event, and that might be for a couple of weeks. But then you don't know whether or not there's going to be any more work after it. So those are your casuals. And the thing to watch out with casuals, though, is that they can double dip on holiday pay. The Holiday Act says that the 8% is you can pay them the 8% uplift in their pay instead of them accruing annual leave when the employment is so intermittent or irregular that the giving them time off with pay can't be given. But it then goes on to say, if you've paid incorrectly after 12 months, they are entitled to time off with pay, irrespective of what you've already paid them. They can get both. And I had a case with an employee who'd been employed as a casual for 20 years. And she was quite happy with the arrangement. She took long summer holidays, school holidays off with the kids, etc., etc. And then the company got taken over by a new boss. And the new boss phoned her up from Australia and said, and I'm not paraphrasing, hey, your husband's working for a competitor, pack your bags and go away. Oh, oops. Well, once we'd peeled her off the ceiling, she said, right, okay, I'm going to go you for everything I can. Item 1 on her agenda was 20 years of back holiday pay, and she won it. So, yeah, watch out for those casuals. So, consider the risk. What starts out as a genuine casual often drifts into a more permanent employment relationship. You can change their employment agreement to change them to a permanent status. But removing the 8% uplift can always be a little bit hard because effectively they're getting a pay cut, even though they are now accruing annual leave at the same rate. They're not getting so much in their take-home pay, and that can be quite difficult for people to understand why they're getting less money in their pay packet. Um, but the casual in writing can be challenged, and that's about what what's actually happening in practice. Are they working a regular pattern? Are they working every Saturday, etc., etc.? So minimize your risk by, if you're employing somebody as a new casual, are they really? If the casual is morphing into regular hours, check in. It's easy to check and change when people are talking. And consider low guaranteed hours contracts instead. This gives you much more flexibility. So low guaranteed hours contracts. Look, the guarantees of hours can be as low as 0, provided you have genuine business reasons for that. And this is often where you look at if somebody is going to be on a regular pattern, but the sort of one step up from being a casual, then a low guaranteed hours contract with no guaranteed hours is the way to go. But generally, we recommend that if you are using lower guaranteed hours contracts, you keep somewhere in the region of about the guarantee, it's somewhere around about 75% of the normal hours. And the reason being for this is that it's not the most attractive thing in the world for a prospective employee to know that the boss can say, well, actually, I don't have any work for you this week at all, so you're not getting any pay. And that's perfectly valid within the contract. If they can know, and how are they going to pay their rent? So if you give them some level of guarantee, but there's some level of ability for you to flex things, it gives you a lot more flexibility. And particularly in the current economic climate, it is tough out there. People are struggling with, ebbs and flows in workflow. So yeah, there was a lot of talk in 2016 around 0 hours contracts are illegal, and they were made illegal. And if you Google 0 hours contracts, yes, there's all sorts of things that say these are illegal. Well, the Employment Relations Act 2016 came out, and what it did was it put in place the requirement for employers to give notice of cancellation of shifts or to pay compensation if they didn't. And you must pay for, and the requirement to pay for the expected shift length or to cut it short or arrange hours at an alternative time. So what this was about, it was pre-2016. Employers would have, somebody turn up for a shift, turn up for an 8-hour shift. They've bothered to get out of bed, etc., spent the petrol to get there or bus fare. And then the employer gets halfway through the shift and goes, oh, sorry, I overstaffed today. I don't need you. Bye. And that was the bit that was felt to be unfair. And so employers were actually forced into a position of saying, actually, no, that's not fair. You need to actually give people notice or pay them for the whole shift. And that was what all the hoo-ha was a few years ago about 0 hours contracts. They are legal, but you have to comply with the notice of cancellation of shifts and when you need them to be available. On low guaranteed hours contract, holiday pay is accrued and all other leave benefits are as per other staff. So whereas a casual, you might be paying the 8% uplift, the lower guaranteed hours contract, you accrue the annual leave. But for the casual, if they meet the hours test or the regular pattern, then they get sick leave and bereavement leave, same as the low guaranteed hours person. And they also must be able to refuse shifts without penalty. That's one of the things that was brought into legislation. So what this is about is you can't just turn around to say to somebody and say, well, I can only guarantee you 10 hours a week, but you have to be available at my whim 40 hours a week. And you can't turn around and penalize people if they say, well, actually, I've already made other arrangements today. And so this is all about fair pay with lower guaranteed hours agreements. You can't use the lower guarantee as a punishment. If you do have a group of staff, and often we'll use this in trades, whereby Your normal hours of work are 40 hours a week, but because of weather, seasonal variations, that sort of thing, we're only, for example, able to provide 30 hours this week. Then you must reduce the hours equitably. So you're spreading, not sort of giving the hours to your favorites. You are actually being equitable about it. And if if they've made an effort to turn up to work and expecting to earn $100, it's not fair to cut them short on a whim. This is simply what the legislation was about. But it is really good way to deal with the uncertainty of the current economic climate. And if you don't have low guaranteed hours agreements in place at the moment, this is something that I am actually using a lot. And sadly, I'm having a lot of discussions about downsizing and redundancies at the moment. But this is a really good way to build more flexibility into your workforce, keep your existing workforce, but reduce them down so that everybody gets, say, 75% of the income, but you manage to keep all the team. By doing that, and then when things ramp up again, you can take them all back up to 100%. Good way to get through these rough times. That again, minimize your risks. In an environment that needs flexibility, get a mix of casual, lower guaranteed, and permanent staff. And if you are utilizing lower guarantees, do a self-check on the fairness of how you're applying them. Are you applying it to your favorites, or are you kind of using it a little bit as a punishment? Fred didn't turn up, Fred didn't turn up last week, so I'm just going to say that, oh, sorry, mate, there's no work this week. Nah, that's a disciplinary process rather than utilizing the fair pay agreements. Fixed term contracts. Now, I know this is a question that was coming up, has come up, and in order to be a valid fixed term agreement, the following conditions must be met. There must be a genuine business reason for the fixed term, and the employer must advise the employee when, how, and why the employment will end. And both conditions must be in writing in the employment agreement. So I know the question that I was asked yesterday was around a fixed term contract with somebody who is overseas, and so they're overseas 6 months of the year and in New Zealand 6 months of the year. So genuine business reason, yes, they're overseas for 6 months of the year. So there's a genuine business reason why they're not being, they are on a fixed term. How and when it will come to an end. So you specify the dates and things like that. You need to have this in writing in the contract. I will give you a buzz though after this webinar, because there's also a tax implication around people who are working in New Zealand and in the UK in this case. So that's fixed term contracts, commonly used for maternity cover, things like that. But you can also use fixed term contracts, for example, for the busy summer period. That might be a way to deal with that. But an alternative, if you've got people who are regularly coming back, so off schools are quite a common one, because there's you might have no work during the holidays, but lots of work during the school term. So you don't want to issue a new fixed term contract every term. So what you can do with them is put them on a low guaranteed hours contract with no guaranteed hours, and specify in the contract that the no guaranteed hours are during the holiday periods. So 0 hours during the holiday periods, but 40 hours during the school term. And that gives you a never-ending contract, which can be useful. Excuse me. Full-time or part-time. These are the next types of employment agreements. And these are for engagements that are expected to be ongoing for a fairly regular number of hours. They can be full-time, normally 35 to 40 hours per week, or part-time, but there's no legal cutoff between what's a full-time worker and a part-time worker. The holiday pay is prorated because that's based on what is your normal week or your ordinary week, but other leave entitlements are fixed. So sick leave, bereavement leave, etc., etc. These are entitlement to public stat holidays. These are all fixed things. So it doesn't actually matter whether or not somebody's full-time or, excuse me, part-time. They could be on an agreed working pattern, shift work, or a variable working pattern. So no difference really between full-time and part-time. It's just that you're saying, yep, your normal hours a week are going to be in the region of 40 hours a week. You might be required to do some overtime, maybe not. Common question I'm asked is whether or not we should go for salary or hourly paid. So a salary is a fixed amount each week. Excessive overtime may be paid. Overs and unders on a salaried agreement are usually taken care of with take care of most of the excess time. So somebody stays half an hour late tonight, they leave half an hour early tomorrow, and that sort of overs and unders usually works. It's good for management, admin, etc., and it's good for budgeting because it's a pretty fixed cost. Watch out for minimum wage, because if the number of hours that they are required to do pulls them into a zone whereby the effective rate per hour that they're getting paid is below minimum wage, you need to bring them up to that. Okay, so it might be that they are actually forced to be paid for overtime. For hourly paid, you do need to have timesheets. So you need to be recording timesheets or some recording system to keep a record of hours worked. You do need that for salaried people as well, but it's technically from the point of view of the legislation, yes, you should be keeping time records for everybody. But salaried, it's more of a regular pattern. So it's easier to actually justify why you're paying that salary. But it's good for those people who work a variable pattern. But you do tend to end up paying for all time worked, even the incidental time. So that incidental time of, well, I knocked off at 5:15. So you end up paying them until 5:15. Whereas with a salaried person, that generally doesn't end up, that just kind of gets absorbed, I suppose. And do remember that 10 minutes a day equals 40 hours a year. So that's a whole week just by that extra 10 minutes. So you do need to think about that carefully with your hourly paid staff. And watch out for excessive hours, health and safety, and cost creep. So the health and safety from somebody actually working excessive time and that cost creep of those building up. Do you have some kind of overtime approval process in place? Often I'll look at companies and suddenly, for some bizarre reason, they're quietening down at Christmas, but their overtime bill starts going up in December. And it's like, it's a good way to earn extra money. Hang around for an extra half an hour, take a little bit longer to do the job. And so you need to make sure that you've got some kind of approval process in place for that. And the next webinar is on Friday, the 3rd of May. And that's about, 31st of May. I've got that one wrong. 31st of May. And that is about getting the right staff mix. So I'll stop my screen share. And if there's any questions.
Nothing's come through yet, Lisa, but by all means, guys, get them in. That was really interesting. I found that really insightful. I suspect that getting the legal structure right for contracts around staff is very important. So everyone on here, I'm sure, got some value out of that. And even though I don't employ people, I still feel like I got some value out of it. So awesome work as always. And I'm not surprised. Every time we do one of these webinars, I find it very interesting, and I'm sure everyone else does as well. So thanks heaps for that, Lisa. 31st of May rather than the 3rd of May. If you come on the 3rd of May, we won't be here.
Well, that's today. How I managed to do that when I'm like, oh,
we're already here. We already made it. We're not coming back again at 10 a.m. That doesn't work. Can't go back in time. So 31st of May, there we go. Twice in a month.
Yes.
Lucky us. So looking forward to that one. And yeah, have a great weekend, everybody. Happy Friday. And just a reminder that this is being recorded. So if you missed anything or you want to show anybody, this will be available on YouTube and other platforms this probably early next week.
Beautiful.
That's all from me. Anything else from you, Lisa?
No, that's everything. And
Awesome.
thank you very much indeed. And Anna, I'll give you a call shortly.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Cheers.
See ya.
Bye.